Thank you very much for having me. It is a great privilege for me to be back with you. I think we did transgenderism last time. It was a heavy one, wasn't it? And this one is sort of linked because I'm going to be speaking on culture and where I think we're at in the UK. And it's a bit of an academic one, part one, because we're just looking at history and how we got here. And then part two will be like, how can we really help culture? Really help. But we've got to understand where we're at in order to help them and know our times. So here's my premise. All right. The UK is in a bit of a mess. I don't know if you agree with that. That's my premise. But I also think, I like church history, and I quite like the 4th century. That's probably my favorite. But I think, actually, other than the 4th century, there's never been a more exciting time to be a Christian and part of church or be evangelists, because it's so crazy. The sad thing, like church and Christianity, is how people get saved, who are broken and lost. And we've got this amazing treasure, but the sad thing about the UK at the moment is, in culture, so few people are Christians. So I want to look at, like, how did we get into this right pickle where we've got the Lord Jesus Christ and yet hardly anybody is trusting in him in the UK? How can we fix that? How do we get here? So let's walk through a bit of modern history. And the reason is, again, to better understand our times. So part one is, what do the clever people say as to how we got into the current mess that we're in? I got lots of notes from clever people that I've been researching for you. To sum it all up, I don't know if you agree with this, but we have been living through a wave of intense, godless individualism, which has broken away from the Christian sort of history that we might have had in the country before. Intense, godless individualism. And we have been on a trajectory for decades, possibly centuries, but definitely decades, towards intense, godless individualism, with no traditions anymore, cultural limits, moral limits, psychological limits, legal limits, and now in recent years, biological limits. We can break from them all. And it's even been encouraged to do that. And it's been coming for a while, apparently. It's been coming from the 1700s and the 1800s and the Enlightenment. Here's what some clever people say about how we got here. Intense, godless individualism. Now, we mentioned this guy in our transgender talk, but I guess you can't remember everything I said back then. I'll forgive you for that. So I'm just going to mention, apparently, independent self-definition, individualism, breaking away from church and Christian history, was getting very popular in modern philosophy in the Enlightenment period, and there in religion as well. There was a chap called Thomas Paine. Have you heard of him? He was around in the 18th century. He was a British philosopher, and he really pushed individualism and breaking away from the shackles of the past. And he was hugely influential on the West and in the UK in the 18th century. And his main message was this: our church is now our own mind. That was a massive philosophical push. My church is my own mind, meaning we should be much more free than ever before now in the Enlightenment to make decisions that seem good to me. Forget everybody else, good to me. There was another chap in philosophy, Alexis de Tocqueville. Have you heard of him? He was a French philosopher, big in the 19th century, and he wrote a book, Democracy in America. And he was observing the rise of individualism in philosophy. And now we're going to stretch us a bit this morning. Here's a quote from him in his massively influential works. This is individualism to him. A calm and considered feeling which disposes each individual citizen to isolate himself from the thoughts of the wider masses and to withdraw into a circle of family and friends which is tailored to his own little society, where you can form your own tastes and let society look after itself. So that was de Tocqueville looking at Europe and particularly French and American culture, and he's saying what's starting to happen is we are starting to tailor things to our own tastes, and you just hang out with people that agree with you. Forget like church and like wide-scale Christianity. That was philosophy in the Enlightenment, hugely influential. It also, individualism and self-expression also was getting massive in the 19th century. Now, so 100 years after those guys were in the philosophical world, there was a chap called Andrew Carnegie. Have you heard of him? Andrew Carnegie was a steel industry tycoon of the 19th century, and he was America's richest man at one point. Here's what he said about individual economy. So individualism is getting big in philosophy, and now also in economics. Ready? He said this: individualism is the foundation of modern civilization and money. It's the foundation of modern civilization and money. So after Carnegie and around that time, this grew. You now can make your own money and have your own job. You don't have to follow what your parents did. And what began then was a million options and variables. The world is yours if you're a European or an American citizen. You can reach the stars. You. Forget the group of you. You. Economically, philosophically, spiritually, you can climb your own mountain and reach the stars. It's the foundation of modern civilization. And now you can see that because you go to Tesco's and variety, there's 10,000 different versions of Rice Krispies that you can order, isn't there? It's everywhere. Everything is tailored to your taste in the church of your own mind and worldview. And, well, then it's like, well, how long is that choice going to spill out from philosophy out of the cereal bowls and into every area of life? And now, and we mentioned this in the transgender talk as well, self-expression and definition at the behest of anybody else is now very popular in biology as well. And with modern science, you can tailor even your biology to reflect the church of your own mind and thoughts in your own worldview. And if you stand in front of a mirror as a primary school child or a teenager or however old, and your body is preaching a different message to the church of your own mind, and what others have told you who you are, or that Bible, or that ancient church tradition have said, if anything is against the church in your own mind, you can now change that too. And are encouraged in modern education and universities and the workplace to do that. Whatever is in your mind, if there's hostility towards anything that's fixed, even your body, you can break free from the shackles of the past. Modern individualism, huge in philosophy, huge in economics, huge in Tesco's, now huge in the classrooms and the home life. And here's the problem, though, as we edge closer to where we're at in the modern world. The problem that we see with that is this big paradox with people that we meet as you're out on the streets preaching or your neighbors or whatever. We have climbed on the throne. We have ascended Mount Everest to reach the stars, and yet we don't even know who we are. Like life's number one question at the moment among young people is, who am I? I don't know. And so we're on the throne, yet we're utterly clueless who even we are, let alone how we can organize our lives. The fundamental question has been lost. We're also told in this individual climb up the ladder that we're from nothing and going nowhere, so this is your one shot to stand out as an individual. That's an enormous amount of pressure for your life to matter, because now it's just you. It's just you to stand out in this crowd. So modern culture, you can sum up like this. You either find someone who are massively arrogant because they think they have reached the stars and they figured it all out, but mostly you're finding people crushed with fragile, low self-esteem, depression, and self-hatred because they're just carrying too much now as individuals. Have you seen any of that in modern culture? Have you seen now maybe a bit of where it's come from? So we've had the age of imperialism. We've had the age of industrialism. You could describe this age now as the age of escapism. I can't handle life. I'm just going to withdraw. I'm just going to scroll through my phone all day, every day, looking at rubbish. So I never have to really confront like what's going on in my mind and brain. I can't handle it. And of course, intense individualism accelerated in 2007. We probably mentioned this the last time I was here because there's an overlap. What happened in 2007, which helped people become even more isolated in their thoughts and worldviews? Yeah, the iPhone came out. 2 of you remembered my last talk. Thanks. The iPhone came out. Now, you didn't used to let strangers in your house and tell your children how to live and how to think, did you? But we do now. They're in their pockets. Scary, actually. I've got a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. Scary. In came flooding young people's minds with forums and communities with often horrific guidance on who you are and what life truly is about and how to flourish and how to exist. I'm sure like secularism is only half of the problem. I'm sure technology is a huge cause of people's depression around at the moment. So that was the run-up. Like, there's one other massive event in our modern history as to how culture's in a mess today. Andrew Wilson, he's a preacher, he's an author. I don't know if you've read his book. It's a good one. It's called Remaking the World, How 1776 Created a Post-Christian West. Have you read that? It's good. Something happened in 1776. Are there any Americans in the room? All right, I'm going to ask you a question now. You don't have to answer. Something happened in 1776. Yeah. A watershed year, which has affected our culture more than you might realize. This is the premise of Andrew Wilson's thesis. Anyway, I think he's probably right. But the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. And you'll know this sentence, but this sentence might have changed our world more than you realize. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, right? Okay? You might say that's the foundation of today's culture. Now, it's about human dignity and worth and value. Now, I don't know if you know this, but that's not how the original draft read. Thomas Jefferson, his first draft did not say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. His first draft said, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable that all men are created equal. Sacred. Not self-evident, sacred. And it was a religious claim that every human is made in the image of God. It's a sacred claim. Anyway, late June, he sent the draft. So Thomas Jefferson sent the draft to Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin put a line through sacred and undeniable and put instead self-evident that all men are created equal. And so began a reverberating effect of a view of humanity that it's no longer a religious claim that we're equal and of value, whether you're tall, short, American, Welsh, whatever. It's no longer that, a sacred claim. It's just self-evident. Now, Jefferson, by the way, he had got that phrase sacred and undeniable from John Locke. And John Locke got it from Richard Hooker, and Richard Hooker got it from the Code of Justinian in the 6th century, and Justinian got his view of humanity from Matthew's Gospel. So there had been a long-standing tradition that humans are innately made in the image of God and therefore have dignity and worth. The problem with Benjamin Franklin's edit is it's not self-evident that all people are created equal. It's not. Because some people excel way more than others. They just do, don't they? People are just better at things than other people. They thought, oh, well, it's obvious and clear to everybody that all these truths are just obvious, that we're created equal. But they haven't been, and that's not how it's played out. So a rot started, my friend, no offense, from America in 1776, whereby you have this Christian fruit idea that we've got worth, but it got severed from the Christian root. So you started having these values in America and in Europe, which became vaguely Christian, that I think humans matter, but I'm actually not sure why. And of course you get Adolf Hitler, who just runs roughshod over the natural conclusion of this idea that self-evident isn't actually true. Just get rid of some people that are holding us back. So you have then suspended vague Christian values handed on to us in the modern culture. And so there's this whiff in the air of like value, but we're not quite sure why anymore or what it's connected to. And so began, everybody, the rise of intense, godless individualism. Are we and on the back of that then, self-promotion, because I've been disconnected to something in the past and God. So I'm my own God now. And that was my little runway of what clever people say how we got there. By the way, part 2 is a lot shorter and more devotional, and there may be time for questions and things at the end there, so jot anything down that you disagree with or you want to know more about. And now, the second part of part 1 is present day and what the clever people say we're like today and what's going on today. Now, apparently, today's culture, and I hope this is of some help as you go out evangelizing, has some marks about it that you can detect and be aware of. So if you meet someone today in the West, they probably have a few features about them that you need to know about. Now then, there's quite a big book that came out recently. The author was Joseph Henrich, and he's an evolutionary biologist in Harvard, and he coined an acronym to describe most humans that you're going to meet in the West, out on the streets, or whatever you're doing, in your church, your neighbors. Do you know what his acronym was to describe Western people right now in the modern era? Anybody? Weird. Which stood for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So most people you meet, not all of them, will probably fall into that category somewhere. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. And he also said, quite a damning review, there is a little sense of society among us in the West, but it's quite clinical and cold. It's certainly not what it used to be when Christian culture was flourishing. And he says that the reason that we're cold and clinical, often in society now, is because we are still our center of gravity. And that comes with a lot of problems. Any notion of society in the West, amongst us weird people, is just transactional. I'll take a bit from you, you take a bit from me, and off we go. And there's obvious detrimental aspects to that. Now, other people on the back of that have observed, why are people not coming to church anymore? Why are people not Christian anymore? Well, why isn't church helping anyone anymore? Where's the breakdown? So you got these weird people, and then here's 3 more authors who essentially say the same thing about how we're at the mess that we're at. They make similar points. There's a chap called Robert Wuthnow. He's got a book called After the Baby Boomers. There's a lady called Abby Day in the University of London. She's written a lot on this. And there's another chap, Noel Weeks. He's a history lecturer in the University of Sydney. They all make this point that church has contributed to this wave of godless individualism, inadvertently. This is where we're going to come in part 2, by the way. Church has but not been very helpful in the mess. They describe church like this. Modern church is a passive place where the main activity is come and listen. Be an audience to what's happening at the front, where the main duty is simply to turn up each week. But then everybody returns to their own individual lives. So those three authors are saying even the church are at this individual stuff, really, if you look at what's going on. I find that quite damning. Because in the Bible, real church is this active place where activities happen every day and people share life together and what we have, and we carry one another's burdens. If you read the Sermon on the Mount, how much is that to do with turn up and hear a weekly lecture? There's not much going on there, is there, in that direction? Almost none. So apparently, church has too much been this cerebral academic lecture center, and we've been as individual during the week as the people out there, the rest of the weirds in the culture. And born into this cerebral Christianity, which hasn't helped many people, was Generation X. Put your hand up if you were born between 1965 and 1980. You're Gen X. You, Gen X, you lot, you deconstructed the shell that you were given. You deconstructed an evangelical subculture that you thought was actually empty in practice. And you began to break away in the UK and Europe and America from church. You gave rise to Gen Y, a.k.a. the millennials. Put your hand up if you're 1981 to 1996. Hey. And also, they gave rise to, well, they didn't. Gen X also gave rise to Gen Z, 1997 to 2012. Anybody? There, one of you. So, Gen Y and Gen Z, they are the ones who have mostly walked away from the faith. But they're interesting because they are determined to find something with substance that they say the hollowed out faith of the boomers never offered us. I'm going to return to Gen Z in part 2 because recently you might have heard of this thing called the Quiet Revival. Now they're involved in that, so we'll pause on them in a bit. But that group of generations sniffed out an emptiness in church, a lack of reality, a cerebral academia which doesn't touch the sides of people's lives. All of this, according to these secular authors, have played a part in how we're in this mess that we're in. By the way, most parents and grandparents of transgender or LGBTQ plus children that I know say their children found a home in the LGBT community that they didn't find in church. In their communities, their hearts are engaged and it's not hollow. It means something, so it's attractive, as opposed to, they say, what we've been offering as church. Hang on, that mug's fallen over there. I'm worried about that. Yeah, all right. It's a nice carpet, this one, isn't it? It was. Now, the fact, by the way, that the younger lot are still looking for communities does speak to this truth, that no one really wants to be an individual, not really at heart. As a Christian, I believe that's because we're made in the image of a Trinitarian God, a loving union of three. Obviously, we love society. But there are societies out there that even these apparent individuals are connecting to. My thing in part 2 is, like, what's the best one out there? Surely it's the one that's got Jesus. Are we offering that one? Really, are we doing church properly or evangelism properly? Incidentally, by the way, 1 in 10 teenagers now identify as LGBTQ+. 1 in 10. And for some, it's just a fad because children are programmable. Others, it's trendy and it'll pass. Others won't. And they'll be who we're pastoring in the next years to come. And if churches just like prioritize being straight or something as our chief end of man, or like get married, churches are obsessed with marrying people off, aren't they? It's just not in the Bible, really, is it? It's all about being married to Christ. And somehow we've just become like a dating thing. And we sell the lie that having children is like maximum life. It's not, though, is it? Single celibate people all through the Bible and church history are basically our leaders who are full of life. Full of life. Anyway, that's part 2. I better not get too much into that. Anyway, so yeah, what are we offering? Next on how we're in this mess. Doug Wilson. Have you heard of him? He's very influential in describing today's culture. He says, don't know if you agree with this, the age of science has caused society to walk away from the church. What do you think about that? He says science, even though its origins are Christian, for one reason or another has caused people to think it has replaced God as a better explanation for everything. So the average person, Doug Wilson says, will think it's one or the other, and most will side with science. My neighbor said to me not too long ago, Owen, you won't find me in your church. I choose science. Well, I don't, like, what does that actually mean? I do actually think, just on that Christian scientists or experts should be better at writing in the secular sphere. And we write books to each other that no one else ever reads. I get irritated by that, sad. I guess there's a bias against publishing Christian stuff, isn't it? But it is interesting, actually, on modern culture. I'm seeing more and more airtime given to Christians to express who they are. And recently, on the Piers Morgan show, they had actually a half-decent Christian scientist. Did you see that? And Piers was giving him time to actually speak and give answers. I'm seeing that more and more, which is interesting. Doug also says, by the way, and this is a recurring theme, and it matters, because if you're out preaching on the streets or evangelizing, you're inviting people to something. What are they going to find when they get there? Well, because they're going to walk away and go back to this individual stuff if there's nothing real there. And Doug says church has been too in-house. He says church has been a country club for nice people who gather on a Sunday to hear a talk. And it's been smooth sailing numerically because you could get away with that because people by habit went to church culturally. But you can't get away with it anymore. John Stott says, if the meat goes off, don't blame the meat, blame the salt. A lot of people are pointing the finger at church for not offering something of substance to a dying world. Doug Wilson says church hasn't been salty. He also says, I'm not saying I agree with Doug, I'm saying he's very influential, so I've been pinching his notes for talks like this. He also says the West will continue to go down the toilet. It's going to get worse for church, for Cardiff, for wherever you're from. He says godlessness will increase, although he does have an interesting view that it's going to get better before the end times. But for now, he says, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I can't help but wonder if he's right. I was watching on an advert on the TV, a documentary coming out about eco-sexual people who find nature sensual and should be allowed to have sex with trees. It's a growing movement. It's like, well, how do we even say no anymore? On what grounds? Also, we've got coming in the UK the romanticizing of suicide, that it's going to be a virtuous act soon and celebrated. You have the rise of pornography with young people, celebrated often by parents. In our mothers and in our parents' group chat with the schools not too long ago. One of the mums asked for advice for navigating her 11-year-old's newly discovered porn habit. More than half of the responses were to the effect of, "Don't worry, that's perfectly normal." That's an 11-year-old, and the parents saying that's fine. So I think, summary of everything, the nation that exists now, that we live in and are witnessing in, is very different from even 20 years ago when I was growing up. Completely different. And it is seen how different it is in the ethics that we promote, our educational programs, our policies, and the festivals we promote. It's weird that my neighbor a few doors down for Halloween, bearing in mind they've got a little girl in my son's primary school, for Halloween they had decorated their front windows with blood-stained hands just being dragged down the glass. I'm like, that's weird. Like on any level, that's weird. The shop opposite the church, they had a wrapped-up dead body in a carpet with blood smeared all over the window and a police do not cross sign. I'm like, dude, that's weird. But nobody seems to think it's weird. That's what's weird. And like the Christians who are just like quite straightforward people, like just, we're the weird ones that they want locked up. Anyway, that's part 2. We'll come back to that. I'm getting to the end of this part 1. Now, how do we reclaim the lost ground? It's mainly part 2, but just in this where we're at culture thing, and because I mentioned Doug Wilson, there's a movement in America, which will come over here, because it always does, called Christian nationalism. This is seen by many as the answer to the mess that we're in. Now, for research, when I give talks like this, I read their manifesto, which was 480 pages, by the way. Thank you. And their main book is written by a chap called Stephen Wolfe. They make some interesting points, mind. And I'm going to park my assessment of the 480 pages. You'll be pleased to know. Maybe you want to talk about it at the end of part 2. But I don't know. It's lacking in some key areas that maybe we'll get into at some point. I just want you to know that that is some people's answer to the current mess. Real militant Christianity. Right, before I make you all cry, let's say some optimistic things. Currently, it's interesting. People are actually thinking a bit more thoroughly than they have been in recent years about matters of faith and life. So Tom Holland, the historian, you know him? Podcast guy and author. He wrote Dominion. He's a very clever chap. And another lady, Nancy Pearcey, who wrote The Toxic War on Masculinity. They make the following observations about culture. We're a bit more optimistic than Doug. They say that they are good at showing, by the way, that the current values that most people you're going to meet hold in the West, whether they know it or not, are Christian. They just don't know it. This comes back to the all men are created equal thing. They're sort of suspended, their values are suspended in the air. They don't have any grounding as to why they believe the things. And they have been, through their work, Tom Holland particularly, pushing people to think, oh, maybe my ethics are Christian. Maybe the ethos that I hold to myself and my fellow man are Christian. And so parts of society at the moment are seeing a bit that the UK historically is Christian, mainly in its ethics and worldview. And some key secular people, though they're not Christians, are starting to worry about what's going to happen to this country if Christianity gets stamped out and replaced. Most of them are worried about the rise of Islam. And they prefer, even atheists now, Christian ethos to Islamic ethos. So in the air at the moment, you're getting quite a lot of high-profile thinkers really wrestling with Christianity again. Some of them are even now calling themselves Christian and naming Jesus as an example to the world that we can't forget and we might need to give more time to. So, I don't know, George Janko. Have you heard of him? Wrong crowd. You should. You know George Janko? You're young enough. Yeah. You don't know him, oh. He like hangs around with Logan Paul. Logan Paul? Anyway, these are big to the young people, all right? And George Janko, he's got a YouTube channel. He's now calling himself a Christian. Kanye West, right? He was calling himself a Christian, though I think that one's ended, because in an interview recently, he said, actually, I think I'm God. So that's a bit of a problem. I think it might have ended. Ryan Garcia, he's a boxer. He's calling himself a Christian. Patrick Bet-David, he's a very famous entrepreneur. Jim Carrey, calling himself a Christian. Joe Rogan, the most famous podcaster around at the moment, has recently said, I think we need Jesus to return because things are so bad. Piers Morgan is calling himself a Christian. Russell Brand recently got baptized. Richard Dawkins, he said, he recently said that he hopes the UK retains its Christian ethics. And he said, do you know, I love Christian hymns. I love the words. I don't believe any of the words, but I love the words. And he called himself a cultural Christian. Someone said, Dawkins, he's like been enjoying apples whilst shooting arrows at the orchard. I love apples. I don't like that orchard. But now he's realizing that the liberties of the Christian orchard may be being replaced by an Islamic orchard. And he knows what will happen if he takes shots at Islam like he's been taking shots at Christianity. He won't be doing that from his comfortable mansion in London. They'll just kill him. So he's now a cultural Christian. Just on Islam, you can't not mention it in a Where We're At. Dr. Gavin Ashenden, I read him, he argues that according to birth rates and immigration, by the middle of the next century, we will be an Islamic republic. I got notes that I've parked if you want to talk about Islam. And he says Islamic blasphemy laws will soon be passed in the UK. And that's the beginning of becoming an Islamic country, really. But they were actually rejected, and it's quite interesting why they were recently rejected, but 1 in 7 local councils still took the blasphemy laws on. It's an interesting minefield legally. Anyway, Tom Holland has been good at showing modern culture, and he does, by the way, get printed in the secular world, that historically our values as Westerners has not come from secular humanism. It has come from Christianity. We've just forgotten it. And then there's another guy, Christian Smith, in a book called Atheist Overreach. He says, philosophically, the values that we hold, whether we know it or not, can't come from secular humanism. It just doesn't give birth to the feelings and thoughts that we have. Only Christianity does. So Tom Holland, good. Historically, it hasn't come from secular humanism. Christian Smith's good. Philosophically, we don't hold secular humanist views, not really. So generally, everybody, at the moment, there's the mood in the air. It seems to be more acceptable at the moment than 5 years ago to say, I'm definitely exploring Christianity again, or I'm praying, or something. There's a mood in the air. And with that in mind, I am going to say another depressing thing. I thought it was all optimistic from now on. It's not. I got one. With that in mind, if Christianity is about to become a trendy fad, or real, we'll think about the quiet revival in a minute, but for some it will be a trendy fad, and for some of these people I've just listed, it'll be a trendy fad. Becoming Christian-ish isn't good either. It's not. It's the real thing or nothing. And if God is just being offered to the answer to the meaning crisis, but no depth or anything, then not too long in the future, something else will be offered as the answer to the meaning crisis, which will sweep people up. It can't just be nominal. Oh, God. Okay, I need God. What does that mean? And on a more scary level, on nominal Christianity that you do not want in the UK, it was during the 19th century when Nietzsche wrote that God is dead, he was surrounded by loads of nominal Christians. And he still wrote God is dead because he knew there was no reality in their lives and it was soon going to give way to something else. He knew the reality wasn't there. And then in 1933, It was nominal Christians that voted in droves for the Nazi Party. And it wasn't long after that, because there was no root, see, to their values. And it wasn't long after that the Hitler Youth were singing, "We have no need for Christ. Hitler is our Redeemer and Intercessor." That was one of their songs. So nominal Christianity just gets swept away with any other movement. Christianish isn't enough. And here's an American statistic. This is fascinating. Committed Christian men are the least likely men in the whole world to divorce their wives, and they are statistically the most loving to their wives and their children. Okay? Nominal Christian men, which is those who claim the name but never show up or engage with the faith in church or anything, they statistically are the most likely men on planet Earth to abuse their wives and children. They are more likely to do that than both committed Christian and secular men. So a nominal Christianity is worse on many levels than no Christianity. Of course, Jesus taught you've got to clean the inside of the cup, not just the outside of the cup. Right, this is my last page. Back to an optimistic note. Here's Michael Graham, a church leader from the Keller Center fellow. He's a fellow in the Keller Center, and he's a co-author of The Great De-Churching. By the way, this is where things get interesting, and why, arguably, talks like this are a complete waste of time, because no one really knows where society's at. It keeps moving. It's so hard to pin down. And this Michael Graham chap did a survey and asked loads of people, why are people leaving churches? And he was expecting, and it was in the last 10 years, and he was expecting the answers to be, well, because of the clash with the sexual revolution, or because of abuse in the church, or the ethics clash, and the scandals among the clergy. What the answers overwhelmingly were, this is why people aren't going to church, by the way, they left church for really boring reasons, like, I've moved house, or the kids are busy on a Sunday. And most of them said that they would come back to church if a Christian asked them to come back to church. So my thing in part 2 is, cutting through all that, what are they going to find when they get to church? What are the evangelists offering people, really? And last half a page, here's on an uplifting note, Rick Warren. He says, Christianity is not shrinking. It's shifting dramatically from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. But there's a pernicious myth out there that the church is in decline, when actually it's growing fast. Since the year 2000, the world population has been growing at 1% per annum, but the church has been growing at 2%. That's 100% faster than the global population, with Pentecostalism growing at 4%. So there are 2.6 billion Christians in the world at the moment, which is more than the populations of North America and Europe combined. And there are more Christians in Africa today than there are people in America. So it's time for us in the West to listen to the global South and learn from them. And I close with this, everybody. There's one more voice that we have to think about as we look at where we're at and who's influencing people and how do we think and what's going on. And who is he? Not Jesus. No, that's part 2. Jordan Peterson, possibly the most influential person for young men of the modern era. And I'll close with an assessment of Jordan Peterson. I don't know what you think about Jordan Peterson. I think at the moment he's very seriously ill. But he has been a Stoic in an age of Epicureanism. Stoics are all about virtue, and Epicureans were all about pleasure seeking and minimizing suffering. Recently in the West, there's been a lot about pleasure seeking and reducing suffering at all costs, and that we have a right never to suffer. But we've probably almost reached our limit now as to what we can do in that world of pleasure seeking and reducing suffering, and people are still quite miserable. It's all been a bit of a famine the last 15 years, a bit of a pigsty. So up rises Jordan Peterson, who is a Stoic in an age of Epicureanism, and his message has been, aim for virtue in the suffering and you will find purpose there. Now, I think Peterson is quite Pelagian, as in he says, copy Jesus. He's a model of good living. I'm not sure Peterson's got much more about him spiritually than that. But the problem is the Stoics and the Epicureans in Acts chapter 17 both unite against the Apostle Paul's message. Paul is a bit like them, but he's also nothing like them. And of course, there is a time to delight in the law and eat and drink and be merry as Christians. And there is a time to be serious with virtue in an age of immorality and harm. But Paul preaches something very different from that and from Peterson. He preaches Jesus Christ and him crucified and his resurrection. And Peterson's message is, and loads of people today have embraced it, hoist others on your own shoulders, help people up the hill towards God and meaning, help them bridge the gap between loss and God and suffering. But the church offers the one who said, come to me and I'll give you rest. There's a big difference there. Jesus doesn't give advice on life tips, really. He doesn't even say you've got to close the gap between you and meaning and God. He says everything's on my shoulders. I'll ascend the hill for you. I've done it all. So on and on the assessments of life and society go. And in part two, we'll think about what are we supposed to do in all of this.